If you look at the founding of America, the founding fathers, they took on the big bad tyrants and they won. But then they had the massive challenge of figuring out a set of rules and definitions that would allow all the states to unite and work together, and that would create a foundation for an entire country and a society and this new system. What did they do? They created it as one nation under God. And they said that it could only be maintained by a moral people. And they based their morality on Judeo-Christian values. Jump ahead a few centuries to where we are now, and you may have noticed that definitions and rules have changed a lot, and sometimes without you even knowing it. And it affects your life in society, and it has absolutely affected the way the country works, very much so. Now, sometimes it seems really crazy when the rug gets pulled out from under you, because suddenly there's a whole new rule and definition going on, right? There's a great film that I've had the privilege to watch recently called Enemies Within the Church, and it just lays out very clearly how we've got to the point where we are at today. But it shows who's behind it. Who is setting those rules and definitions? What do they want? Why do they want to change them? And what it means for you in your life here in a country that is undergoing massive change set by, I'm not going to give away who. You have to see the movie for that. But in lieu of watching the movie yet, you get to listen to an interview with one of the movie producers, Reverend Cary Gordon. And it's fantastic to be able to speak to him, because if you've seen any of my films, you know I don't shy away from controversy. It shouldn't be controversial, just to state the facts and present true information, as is done in this movie very well, I may say. It shouldn't be controversial, but for some reason it is. But that doesn't mean we need to hide away from it. Let's see what is going on. You do not want to miss this interview. You are watching the Today with Kay show, and I'm Kay Rubacek. Gold, 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 gold. Have you heard that before? If you haven't been paying attention. We are heading into a recession. It is inevitable. It is a really serious financial crisis. Many people have known this is coming for a long time. The financial analysts who are finally actually talking about it are saying it's going to be a lot worse than they expected. They knew it was coming. Come on. But are you prepared? If you are not, it's not too late. If you want to use gold as a way to secure your assets, you need to talk to someone you can trust, someone who knows the financial industry. Don't talk to a podcaster like me. I know communism and socialism, and I know the economics of that, but I don't know how to invest in gold. You got to talk to an expert. I trust Ira at ourgoldguy.com. Do whatever you can to protect yourself for the upcoming financial crisis. You've got an idea of what's coming. No one knows exactly how bad it's going to be, but now is the time to prepare. Go to ourgoldguy.com, talk to Ira, and mention my name, Kay. Reverend Cary Gordon, thank you so much for joining me today. I actually wanted to start with, your movie starts with a warning. And that any movie that starts with a warning, I've got to say, that does make me even more interested to know what is going on, especially when it's a true story or a documentary. Can you tell us a bit about why you need to put a warning at the very beginning of your movie?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me on your show today. It's a privilege any chance I get to talk to people about what's going on in the world. And we begin with a warning because I think American culture is set up to be very easily offended and triggered, so to speak, where if someone presents something that is unsavory or maybe a little bit frightening, then we immediately want to dismiss it and just accuse anyone who brings the message of, wearing a proverbial tinfoil hat. And so we wanted people to know that we have to talk about heavy things. They are scary, but they're true. But more importantly, if we could get people to listen and sit still long enough, we really believe we end the movie with hope. It's not just a complaint. We end the movie with an action plan. Here's some great things, some positive things, and powerful things that we can do as American citizens, or even if you're not an American, if you're in another nation, there are things you can do too that are biblical, decentralized, and very effective to pivoting people back toward basic foundational truths of liberty.
That's what I loved about the end of the movie, that you did land on hope, because it was heavy. But another thing that I really enjoyed about the movie is that you presented so many examples of everything you were talking about: primary sources, primary research. This is a very well documented film. And I can say that with some substance, I think, because I'm also a documentary filmmaker. I'm quite familiar with presenting difficult topics through
Mm.
film, and the censorship that you receive. There's pushback.
Yes.
You had to probably, I'm assuming that, well, I know you would have had to go through a lot to get this movie done. Can you give a summary about why you made this film and how it's changed you?
Oh boy. Well, yes. To your point about pushback, there there was plenty of pushback. There's lots of censorship. Um, the entire media industry is set up to disallow truth speakers, ironically, and truth is accused of being, of course, a lie, and the lies are praised and applauded as being the truth. So it's a pretty bizarre experience, and we did get plenty of that. There's a remarkable parallel of history repeating. And from a church history standpoint, people don't know about it. But essentially, the reason why we made the movie is history is repeating. And we're at a tipping point, we believe, in the history of the West. And what I found in my research 3.5 years before we really started plodding along to make the film, and it took us almost 4 years to get it done. We've reached, I think, a few million people now, despite all the blocks and the pushback and the resistance. We've still, there's a grassroots movement. People see it and they love it, and they spread it to their friends and their family. I get letters daily from people who just saw the film. In fact, I got one last night before I went to bed. But history's repeating, and here's the fastest version. So in 1691, an autocratic, very rich Prussian King Frederick, he saw an opportunity to co-opt the church in his time. 1691, long time ago. The church was in his way. The Christian world was very dominant and very authoritative, and very much entrenched in all facets of society in Europe. And that bothered him because he wasn't necessarily a devout Christian himself. And so he was constantly having resistance from the Christian religious authorities. And he saw an opportunity to co opt the church, to eliminate the threat of the church, so that men like himself could go on and do what they want to do without being hindered by moral people, specifically Christians. And so he saw the opportunity because he found this young man that was almost universally branded as a heretic. And he was teaching something really interesting to King Frederick. He was teaching that Christians should stop fussing about political things and government things, and stop using Christianity as a way to influence external realities of human behavior, but instead they should exclusively focus on the internal man and worry about the inside of one person and forget about all those external things. Well, Frederick really liked that because he wanted to get the church out of his way so he could do whatever he wanted to as an autocrat. And so what he did is exactly what's happening now. History's repeating. King Frederick took this young man who became known as the father of pietism, the idea that Christianity should just focus on the souls of men and don't mess with politics. He took this young man and he realized you can't change the existing structures of the church, the existing pastorate, all of the theologians. They believe what they believe. You're never going to convince them to go along with what this young man is teaching. August Frank, if I'm saying his name right, he was German. So here's what he did. He took his wealth and his power and his money, and he took this young preacher and he said, I'm going to help you build a Bible college. And we're going to draw in young people who don't think like their parents. And then you can indoctrinate them to think the wonderful way that you do and send missionaries around the world to change the way Christianity behaves. And that's precisely what he did. He propped him up. He built a school. He funded it. He gave him untold resources and financial wealth. And across the next 40 years, Frank literally changed fundamental Orthodox Christian views of what Christianity is supposed to mean in society. Fast forward to right now, the same thing is happening. In 2020's America, a Hungarian born communist billionaire named George Soros saw the exact same opportunity to co opt the mighty and dominating societal powers of American evangelicalism. And he did it. He bought them off. He's entrenched himself with his money and his many different front organizations to financially allure Bible colleges and seminaries across the United States to teach something we call the woke gospel, which is essentially ultimately declaring that Jesus Christ is a proponent of socialistic Marxism or communism, one of those isms of statism. And Jesus is believed by many young people today and by an emerging mass of new pastors, young pastors ascending to the pulpits of various denominational churches in the United States. They are teaching their people that socialism is how Jesus wants us to show compassion to the poor and to the needy and the less fortunate. And they're lying. They're doing the exact same thing King Frederick did. They're eliminating a political obstacle called Orthodox Christianity. Does that make sense? That's why we did the movie.
It does. And you covered so many, well, let's say you covered all the aspects of this topic. I mean, very, very richly. Maybe there's some that you didn't that I don't know of, but what I could see within the film is that you covered so many aspects that if everyone could see this, they would really see how much why socialists see the church as such a threat, and
Right,
why they are doing everything they can to eliminate the power that the church has, and the power that it has over the faith that any individual has in a divine law above a human law, which is what socialism is always about, is putting in
right.
that social law and trying to play God. I like to say they like to play God instead of eliminating God. It's such a selfish motivation. Um, and now, how did it change you? How are you different after going through such a learning? Like, I mean, you must have been aware, you must have seen things going on beforehand. And in the movie, you said that this was painful to accept the
Yes,
information and some of the stories. You interviewed some really high profile people.
yes,
And how are you different after this journey?
yes. Thank you for asking me a second time. I got lost in my last response. Well, I can tell you this. I knew something was wrong. I think everybody kind of does. You look at the United States, you're like, something is just off. What is happening? Why is everything unraveling so quickly? And we answered that in the journey of making the film. It was 3.5 years. It was sometimes grueling. There were times I got done doing interviews and my head was pounding and I was emotionally drained because of realizing how bad things really were. I think what changed mostly for me is the lid was pulled off, and I could no longer assume that there was a silent majority anymore. There just isn't. There's no longer this idea that's somewhat comforting to you as a patriotic American and a Christian who understands the founding era and the history that is no longer taught in our schools, and we cling to it, and we remind one another in our churches. I could no longer assume that that knowledge was predominant in the existing population of the United States. It just isn't. And further, I could no longer assume that there was a robust remnant of strong churches left in the United States. It simply isn't the case. I realized how outnumbered I was. And I think if I was to relate to any character in the Bible, I sort of joined my heart and my compassion for a character in the Bible named Gideon. I really understood Gideon better after 3.5 years of making this film than when we began, because we are outnumbered. And that's a hard thing for people to accept. But the facts are the facts. Orthodox biblical teaching that properly presents the historic ancient gospel that has been heralded in every generation for 2,000 years, there's not many churches left really doing that now. Not in the United States, and probably not in much of the world. We really are a remnant. But the good news is the real remnant that really preaches the truth of the Bible. I mean, we're in possession of the most powerful thing in the world that no army, no fascism, no false philosophy of government could possibly survive it. If we will just preach it and live it and really believe it, it's more powerful than any of the lies that humanism can conjure up. So, it's discouraging on one hand to know how outnumbered we are, but it's very encouraging on the other, and very hopeful to realize what we do hold between the covers of our beautiful Bible is the most powerful truth in the world, and there's nothing Satan can do to stop it.
And can you remind our viewers about Gideon's story and how that relates
Yes,
to?
Gideon, his story begins. He's sort of a defeated man. His nation's defeated by the enemy. Everything looks completely hopeless in the natural. They're painfully outnumbered, and he's just doing what he can to get by and barely survive. And he has an encounter with an angel sent from God that says, I've got a special mission for you. I want you to free my people. I want you to free Israel and restore them to real justice and restore them to proper worship of the Lord God Almighty. And he's overwhelmed with that mission and doesn't think he's capable of doing it, but he's encouraged multiple times supernaturally by God. And he amasses a pretty considerable number of men to go fight a war. And God says, no, you've got too many people to fight. And it doesn't make any sense to him, but he obeys God, and he sends home anybody that's afraid, go home. And most of his army leaves. And then, God tells him some other things to do when he ends up with just 300 men against this massive army that he's supposed to go to battle against. And it looks absolutely absurd from any perspective of military prowess. But he plods forward, trusting God knows what he's doing. And he takes this tiny number of men who are not afraid against all odds and who are obedient and willing to just step out in faith. And he uses them, and he utterly defeats, against all odds, the enemy. And he ushers in a period of liberty and freedom for the Israeli people. And so, feeling that this looks ridiculous, it looks hopeless, there's absolutely no way that we could ever turn America back toward its founding principles that really came from the pilgrims and the scriptures. And that's how I feel. I feel like there's just no way to do that. But I also know that I serve the God of Gideon. He's still very much on the throne, and he's still speaking to people like me and people like you and saying, just have faith and obey me and watch what I can do. And so there is hope for America.
There is. And I love hearing stories of hope. It's so important that we remind each other of these positive stories, because there is that feeling of hopelessness and helplessness in everyone in society. I look at the statistics for suicide rates, for depression, for anxiety, and this is where you think, wow, if people are feeling that way, that life is that hard, then maybe sometimes we're missing the point that this is the ultimate test of faith, isn't it?
Right.
That's perhaps another way to look at it. So you being a pastor and working in, with your life of service within the church, how are you seeing the reactions among others within the church and what is needed to really help them awaken to this. It's very obvious information when you present it the way it's in the film. It's very well researched, well documented, and it's very clear. But I imagine a lot of people are not willing to either look at it or accept it. How are you dealing with that?
Well, what we've found is people who are predisposed to not liking unpleasant truth won't sit down and watch the film. But people who are frustrated enough and seriously want answers and want to know what is going on, what's happening, why is my church so different now than it was even 5 years ago? Why is the pastor talking about things like white privilege? Why is he using this new glossary of terms that they're not comfortable with and not familiar with and not really sure what does this mean? And there's a lot of people like that, and they really just want an explanation. What's happening? What's going on? And so a movie like ours appeals to that interest. And what we found is if they'll watch the movie, if they'll watch it all the way to the end, they have an epiphany. And we've had such feedback. The majority is very positive. It's usually, thank you, I finally understand what's going on. Everything is so confusing. You've got all the gender confusion. The boys want to go to the girls' locker room. The girls say that they're boys. And the government, it just seems like it's crazy. What is going on? Well, I think we bring it all together and show there's really a fairly sophisticated agenda behind all of what looks to be crazy. It's actually crazy like a fox. They know exactly what they're doing and they're implementing it brilliantly. I mean, if I were the devil, this is exactly what I would do to take America down. And the idea that they could get in really the anchor of the ship at sea. If America was a ship at sea and it was a storm, there's an anchor that becomes very, very important to keep you from drifting so far away from where you belong. And the church is the anchor. And I think the entire woke movement is basically an attempt to sever the rope so that they can get the ship of America to drift in the direction they want it to drift in. And the church is a huge obstacle. So what you find out in the film is that the hard left, the Marxists, the communists, the progressives, by any other name, they've been working for a good strong century to unhinge the church from its real moorings and its ancient teachings. And they're being very effective. And the antidote to that is truth and a fierce defense of the gospel. And that's what this movie is. We're heralding a call to Christian Americans to return to basic fundamental truths and to reject these fads that are popping up that are ultimately spiritually deadly.
Spiritually deadly, yes. And you mentioned language, changing definitions, the woke terms, and things coming into the church that are very much politicized. In the movie, you gave an example of this, changing definitions and redefining terms, where one of your interviewees talks about a level against a wall. And so
Right,
if a wall is crooked, right, then you put a level against it. The level should show you that the wall is crooked.
right.
And can you tell us about this example? I really found that was a really excellent example just to show how
Yeah,
our definitions are being changed, because that's exactly how the communists and socialists work.
I agree with you. That was a really great illustration. I believe you're referring to Dr. Bankson in Florida. When I interviewed with him, he pointed out how clever the left is. And so, if you have a tool called a level and you're in a construction project, you take the level to the wall and you make sure that your stud is level, and the the instrument shows you now you need to hammer that board a little bit at the top because it's a little crooked, and that way you can keep your wall as straight as possible for um, longevity purposes. But what the left does is they criticize the level itself. You bring something and the wall is clearly crooked, and they say, well, what's wrong is this level, and they want to throw the tool out instead of fix the problem. And that's the subtlety and the deceptive work of Satan, really. And so what you see is Christianity is a level in society. Christianity, the teaching of real truth from the scriptures, is how we measure what's right and what's wrong. But if you can pivot everything against true Christianity and vilify it and demonize it, well, then you can attack the very instrument used to keep society straight. And that's what they're doing. And either you bow down to the woke agenda and you take on their new philosophy, or they demonize you as being hateful and bigoted, and maybe you're racist, and they slander your integrity and your motives with all of these horrible labels to demonize you and make you an enemy of the culture and an enemy of society, rather than saying, the Christians are here to keep us straight. Our country's getting off track because the Bible has always said 10 fundamental things called the 10 commandments, and we're just routinely breaking all 10 of those things and glorifying that disobedience on a daily basis. So there's a collision of philosophies. And what you see then is a lot of the churches are adopting the language and the philosophy of humanism. I call it cosmic humanism because you can still wrap it in Christian veneer and use even Bible verses pulled from their context. And you can wear a clergy collar and stand up and say all kinds of nonsense that is no cohesion at all with what the scriptures have taught for thousands of years. But as long as it looks Christian and it happens in a Christian building, our society will just assume that it's Christian, but it's a counterfeit. And that is the enemies within the church. And that's why we've named our film Enemies Within the Church. And you can stream it immediately at enemieswithinthechurch.com. And I really highly recommend that everyone do it. I think you'll be glad that you watched it.
Yes, I can say that too. Even if you are not a Christian, you can watch this film and look and really understand how socialism, communism, all these isms work. And really, the root of that, Karl Marx himself called communism a specter. What is that? That's a demon. That's an otherworldly being. You can call it the devil itself. So, really, I think if you look at it that and just keep an open mind, you will find a lot of answers in this movie that tie everything together. So enemieswithinthechurch.com, is that right?
That's correct. Enemieswithinthechurch.com. And again, the movie's not just a complaint. It's not just a chronological list of everything that we don't like that's going on in our culture. It's also a call to action. And we have solutions that we offer. And our website gives those solutions for free. After you watch the movie, we have something called 5 Steps to Saving America. And we give people an action plan, like get a worldview. You need to know, what does the Bible say about taxation? What does it say about economics? What does it say about marriage and gender and sex and proper roles in society? And what is justice? Who gets to define what justice is? Is it us, or does God get to define that term? Who gets to define good and evil? Is it us? Do we change the definitions at our whim? Is it convenient that we maybe change the definitions of good? A little bit too convenient. So we deal with all of that, and we say get a biblical worldview so that when you go out and use activism and participate in our republic, that you're doing the right thing, that you're thinking the right way, that you're saying the right things and communicating good things that'll help our society. And so we have an action plan. And what we really hope is more than just watch the movie, is do something. Do something after the film. And here's 5 things we can do this together. And it starts in the hometown where you live, in the city where you live. You don't have to feel like it's you taking on the whole world. We just want you to be a voice in the town where you live. And you'll be surprised how effective leadership can be. Our culture is filled with cowardly people. And all it takes is one person to stand up. You don't have to be mean, but just to stand up in a kind way and say the truth puts courage in other people just to hear you do it. Next thing you know, you're not alone. There's 15 people standing with you. And then maybe a month later, you got 50 people. Then there's 100 people. And you realize there's really a lot of people that do still think right. They just don't have the courage to say anything. And we just need people to be leaders in their communities.
Yes, that's such a great reminder. Friends, when you go and watch this movie, don't think about watching the movie as an end game. Think of it as you are just starting on this next step of the journey as to how are you going to make sense of what's going on around you, with the crazy things happening in the world today, and what you actually are going to do about it. So make sure you go to enemieswithinthechurch.com. Watch the movie, but within the mindset of that you're actually going to get some solutions and put them into practice in your life. Courage, faith, I think that's absolutely what we need, but we need the truth. And the whole concept of defining the terms. Who sets the definition for you out there? Who do you decide Who sets that level? Who says that wall is straight? Where does that measurement come from? And the communists have been working on changing those measurements and twisting and turning them constantly since their inception. So pay attention to that. Pastor Cary Gordon, Reverend Cary Gordon, thank you so much for talking with me today. Everyone, please go to the website, Enemies Within the Church. Stay hopeful, stay positive, find your worldview, decide what your definitions are going to be, and make sure you watch the movie with a long-term perspective of getting solutions, and don't be afraid of looking at the truth. That's what we need to do. Don't be afraid of looking at the truth. You have been watching the Today with Kay show. Please go and like, subscribe, share, all those sorts of things. If you're listening on a podcast, please click the 5-star review button, because that's the only one that the algorithm on that podcast platform actually cares about. It helps the show to be heard and seen by more people. If you don't want to give a 5-star review, it's better not to give a review at all, and I will never ever be offended. I really appreciate that you've spent this time with me and a wonderful guest today. Until next time, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.